Okay, we are recording.
Okay, it's 1 p.m. on February 3rd, Monday, February 3rd, and I would like to call the meeting to order. This is a meeting of the Land Use Review Board, and I am the chair, Janet Hurley. And if we could just identify, well, it looks like we don't have any public here, so everybody knows everybody.
We do have a member of the public with us at 10
Oh.
Baldwin Street.
I see Tom, but I'm pretty sure he knows who we all are now.
That I do.
Okay,
And
thanks,
you have
Tom.
these nice little name tags on the bottoms of your picture in the lower left
Great.
corner, so.
Perfect. Yeah. So we did want to do a roll call, however. So Sarah Had,
Sarah Han, present.
Kirsten Sultan,
Present.
Alex Weinhagen,
I am here.
Brooke Dingledine.
Dingle-Jean, and I'm
Dingle
present.
Dean. Sorry,
Gotta-
Brooke.
Oh, no, just need to train you, that's all.
Yeah. And that's all 5 of us. Thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda that anyone would like to propose? I don't hear any. So let's, go ahead.
It's not a change, but I just wanted to mention that Catherine Servideo, who will be joining us about the wood products manufacturing study, is not available prior to 1:30, so she'll join at that time. We can begin going over that agenda item, and I'm guessing probably stars will align.
Okay.
So.
Okay, or we could, if she's not here yet, we could rearrange a little bit at that time when we get to it. Okay. So we do have consent agenda for the minutes of our first meeting on the 27th and our second meeting on the 28th. Can we, is there any discussion about either of those minutes? I believe, Sarah, you had something. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand.
I'd just like to make a motion to accept both minutes.
Kirsten?
So I'm not seconding. I'm wondering if we need to do that before we discuss.
Yeah, if somebody can second it, I don't want to because I was the author of them to some extent. So if somebody seconds the motion, then we can have discussion on it, I believe.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean you have to vote.
Second.
Okay. Discussion on that. Sarah?
So I think I'd like to clarify on the Tuesday meeting under public comments. I think Annette Smith, the comments, she wasn't necessarily looking for a specific response so much as trying to make sure that we had a process in place to respond. So perhaps that sentence could be structured differently. It's under agenda item 2, public comment.
Do you have any
So,
proposed language you'd like to suggest?
I think if we took out the first part of that sentence and left it at she wants to make sure that public comments are responded to, I think that might be a bit more accurate.
Kirsten? You're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. I had a comment about the same set of minutes from the Tuesday meeting. And I didn't go back and look at the recording, but I thought about media and legislative requests that the board adopted having media requests and legislative requests go through the executive director. But the minutes identify that it's only the media requests that would go through the executive director.
Yeah, I noticed that too, but I couldn't be 100% certain that the motion was given that way, so I didn't, and I didn't have time to go
Yeah.
back to the recording.
Same.
Okay, the
Um,
next sentence I think clarifies that. Just read past the one that you're stuck on.
Kirsten, do you
I'm o-
feel okay about the,
I'm okay with
This-
that if
Okay.
others are.
okay. Any other discussion on the minutes?
I had 2 comments on the minutes from our first meeting on January 27th. The first is just, you don't need to change them, but maybe going forward, you can, our secretary could remove the very specific times. I'm not sure that those are necessary next to each agenda item, 1:30, 6 p.m., that sort of thing. And more substantively, at the bottom of page 2, on those January 27th minutes, there is a comment about, this is under roles and responsibilities, and it says that the board discussed Act 181 rules and studies and proposed assigning a 2-person team, keeping in mind that a 2-person team is a committee and may trigger open meeting law. I'd kind of like to revise that to say not that we proposed that, but rather that we discussed assigning a 2-person team and instead opted to have a 1-person lead due to the concern about triggering open meeting law. I'm not concerned that it is exactly as the words just came out of my mouth, but that was my recollection, that we sort of had that discussion and then said, ooh, yeah, let's not create a bunch of subcommittees.
Okay, any more discussion? Seeing no hands raised and hearing no comments, can we deal with the minutes from the 27th first, perhaps, with a motion that may correct or revise in the manner that Alex just described?
I think Sarah has a procedural point for you, since we're
Oh,
already in the
sorry,
middle of a
Sarah, go
motion.
ahead. Yeah,
So I think what I'd like to do is to amend my previous motion to accept changes as noted in both sets of minutes.
okay, great. Is there a second to that?
Sure, I'll second that.
Okay, and now is there discussion on this motion?
What, Janet, I'll just recap to make sure that I'm going to make the proper changes.
Okay.
So on January 7th minutes in section Roman numeral 8 regarding, am I in the right place? Wait a minute.
January 27th, you mean?
Right. I've
Yeah,
lost a net.
Section 4,
Section 4.
yep, the first sentence. Instead
Right,
of and
yeah.
proposed, yeah,
Sorry, I was on the other one. I had the wrong document up. So
Yeah.
in section, so I'm on the 27th minutes in Roman numeral 4. That's roles and responsibilities, part 2. And we are going to change the wording from proposed to discussed, assigning a 2-person team, but decided to
How about we-
assign.
How about we keep it simple, Brooke? Just change proposed to discussed and we're done.
Okay, gotcha. Proposed to discussed. And then in the other set of minutes regarding Annette Smith's comment, to alter it to make sure it says she wants to make sure public comments are responded to. That last sentence we will alter.
Mhm.
While you're in that paragraph, I think there's a typographical error. Just it says dealt. There should be an A, DEALT, an issue that hasn't been dealt with in that second paragraph in section 2.
Gotcha. So we'll change that typo as well.
Since we're still discussing, I agree that I don't think the times are necessary, but they may be helpful if people need to refer to the tape for any reason. This could be helpful. So if they're easy to put in there, I would not object to keeping them in.
Yeah, it's so that if folks read the minutes and they're interested in more detail about that, they can easily find within a tape, because sometimes these tapes are 2 hours long, and I think it's really useful to be able to wait, want to waste time trying to find it. If there's something easier, I mean, I'm putting the time down. Maybe I can also coordinate it with the actual number on the video itself, if that would be better or more confusing.
I think it would be more work. So I think what you're doing is fine. It gives us an idea of where in the tape to begin to look. So we have a motion and a second. Kirsten?
I was just gonna say, I agree. I think it's helpful if it's not difficult to include that detail. Potentially helpful.
Any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor, say aye. Aye.
I,
And there were none opposed. I saw 5 hands and heard 5 ayes. So unanimously passed. Now let me find the agenda again. Actually, oh, yeah, we did get public comment, sorry. So, given that our wood products manufacturers report update may involve someone who's not yet in the meeting, right? Yes. Can we move up legislative updates, perhaps? We need a motion to do that.
I'll move to modify the agenda to move legislative updates up to item E.
I second. Oh, I'll withdraw.
Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
I,
I,
All right, legislative updates.
Yeah, do you want to hear from me on that? To
Yeah,
start?
sure, Pete.
Yeah, great. So as you're all aware, there was the governor's housing proposal that was released last week. That's going through various committees. They had a joint housing on the Senate and the House side discussing that proposal, which has a number of technical corrections related to Act 181, as well as various policy choices as well under Act 181. We'll certainly keep you all appraised of kind of where those where that bill goes, but also others. My understanding is that that bill was a draft proposal by the governor's office, but has not gotten through the legislative council drafting phase, so they don't have an official bill number per se that is, you know, in a particular committee or assigned to a particular committee at this point. But we will learn more about all of that. One other point that I'll make on that one is it does have a provision for the open meeting law in there addressing that provision for the board that would apply to the board, essentially removing that requirement from the board and its operations and its unique circumstance that way. So that is in that proposal. I do expect that there may be some other proposals related to that outside the context of the governor's housing proposal, omnibus bill. I think it you know, if you all want, it would be helpful to talk a little bit more about your thoughts and interactions with the legislation, with that particular legislation and other legislation that may come up. I know I will be working with Janet on kind of the legislative proposals that come forward, but certainly keep you all appraised in these meetings.
Hey, Pete.
Can we have a little conversation, Janet, about
Absolutely.
legislation? Great.
Yes.
So yeah, thanks, Pete. It was a very large bill that the governor's team put together. And my understanding is that I think it was Act 181 charged the Agency of Commerce and Community Development with doing a study and issuing a report on affordable housing, and that some of those study recommendations were woven into the proposed legislation. I imagine we've all looked at it. I at least took a first skim through it. I saw a lot of interesting provisions in it. Some that are going to have a very difficult time, I think, in the legislature, given the original intent of Act 181. And I'm curious, Pete, if you can recall any other sort of LURB specific provisions in the bill beyond the open meeting law. Mr. Weiss had raised the issue of our terms actually at one of our meetings, and if I remember right, that's included in the bill, some sort of clarification of that. Is that accurate?
Pete, you're muted.
Pete.
Let's see. Yeah, there is a provision for that. There is, as you mentioned, you know, kind of the PHP piece. There is some sorry, and just for the public as well, you know, priority housing projects is PHP. There is some provisions for that extending, and that came out of that study that you were mentioning on from ACCD. There's discussion of jurisdictional opinions and having those come through on behalf of the Land Use Review Board. There's let's see, other provisions that are maybe of note that would come. There's provision in terms of opt-out, opt-in on the tiered 1B process. That's you know, more kind of on the policy side of things. Let's see, there's a portion in terms of, there's just kind of and this really goes to some of those technical corrections of there's a language that would in 181 that talks about let's see, what's the proper term here? Blanking on the term here, sorry. In terms of dealing with permits that would be expired, you have kind of the wrong language there where it sets up a revocation process for those, and this would clarify that that would need to be a separate process for the board to take part in that way. Maybe the most productive way to do this would be to kind of set out maybe at the next meeting kind of some of the outline of things that are particularly kind of technical based that are affecting the board, in which case then you guys could kind of look at those very specifically and see where you fall on those particular items. Like you said, it's an 81-page omnibus housing, and it'd probably be helpful to look at least those sections where there are those kind of very technical corrections and how they would impact the board's work.
Yeah, I would find that super helpful.
And I might add the three bigger policy issues that were raised that affect the board are the rescinding the road rule or eliminating the road rule, and the 8C study, and the idea of eliminating tier 3. So, replacing tier 3 with a study, actually. So those, of course, have relatively large implications for the work we're going to be doing.
Yeah, I think those are big ones. And honestly, when I first read the bill, those are some of the ones that I thought the legislature was probably not going to react favorably to. And because of that, I'm actually more interested in us talking about the technical things that I think the legislature will likely be more receptive to. With that said, this idea of formalizing how existing permits are discharged when the use is no longer occurring and the current use of the property wouldn't trigger Act 250 was a piece of Act 250 reform that I never felt made it fully across the finish line in Act 181. And so I was interested to see that provision in the governor's proposal, but don't really understand it well enough. And what I'd love to hear from staff at a future meeting is how that process currently works under the existing rules today. Don't have to talk about it now, but I do feel like some sort of an off-ramp in certain special circumstances, is warranted, and would love to hear how that works today. And if it doesn't work well, perhaps that part of the governor's proposal is a positive one.
Thank you, Alex. Any other comments from board members? Go ahead, Brooke.
I agree with sort of our thought previously about sticking to the technical issues, procedural issues that affect us. In terms of the policy issues, is there any role to play in terms of assessing an altercation or one of these significant changes to at least look at the timing and the timeline of all the tasks that we have to see if, for example, between now and July 1st, is there any significant work to be done on, the three big policy issues that appear to be now in flux? Just to report in terms of the board work and scheduling. It may be that it's not going to impact us at all because it's simply not going to be on our plate yet chronologically versus all of the other tasks that we have to start engaging in. Or maybe there is an issue. So, but I think maybe that would be the role, if any, to play on these policy issues, is maybe just to make some sort of report or acknowledgement that we're embracing and moving forward with the road rule because we need to start down that path. So an altercation there, we would have to pull the plug later, as opposed to maybe we're not getting to that task before July anyway. It's just a thought.
Yeah.
So
I'll
the tier
flag-
3 rulemaking stakeholder group was supposed to have been already convened. So that's one that we are tasked with addressing before July 1.
However, the governor's proposal doesn't eliminate our responsibility on tier 3. It simply changes it, as you mentioned, Janet, from a rulemaking process to a study, presumably with a
Yes.
similar stakeholder group. So
Yes.
I don't think that we're going to change much in our actions in any case, because we still need to put the stakeholder group together, about
Right.
a month ago.
Right. Right.
It would be fun to see, Pete, if you are and other staff are able to come up with sort of the reduced list of LURB related items in the bill, for a future meeting, I'd be interested in seeing that, and then we could have a little more discussion on some of those specific measures, so that you and Janet, who are the ones handling legislative requests, are ready when the housing committees in the House and the Senate say, hey, could you come in and address these proposals?
Kirsten.
Yeah, so I was just going to acknowledge that, yeah, I see the administration's proposed changes to 8C and the road rule and tier 3 as substantive policy topics. And I do see a difference. I understand what you're saying, Alex, about engaging a stakeholder group to focus on the work ahead under the current legislation, but my interpretation of the administration's current draft would change that to, a study of the necessity. And, and it is a different, it is a different study mandate. So yeah, of course, there'd be a lot of overlap. So I think we need to, just be careful how we're moving forward under the legislation as it stands.
Sarah.
So I think we're getting into a little bit of the updates on studies and reports later on. I think it's a good discussion, but in terms of implementation, maybe that's a better one to have once we get to the agenda item in terms of specifics.
Brooke.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know that anything's going to change. And quite frankly, it should not matter to us. We have our statutory orders that we have to follow and implement. And to the extent, though, that we can maybe anticipate, for example, to broaden some of the questions, Kirsten, if there is possibly some way to just make sure we cover all the bases when we're going through our process, so that the information we derive may be applicable to a slightly different question that's asked of us to report on. But we got to follow orders right now.
I agree with Brooke. And my only caveat is there are some orders that we ourselves as the board and staff feel need to be tweaked. And for those, I think we should be proactive with the legislature and allowing the other issues, the more substantive policy issues, to play out, as they will, without us trying to drive those buses. But with that in mind, there is another bill that was introduced. I can't remember if we mentioned it last time, and it's related to appeals, which is another study, which we can get to, Sarah, but H42 is a bill that would create a new housing appeals board that would not review Act 250 permits, so it's not fully our purview, but it would review municipal appeals of projects that have housing in them. And given that we're charged with the appeals study on our end and that Brooke will be leading that, and we'll talk about that in another agenda item, H42 might be something worth just having on our radar. I'm assuming staff already does have it on your radar, but I don't know that bill's going anywhere, but I was intrigued when I saw it proposed.
Who proposed that, Alex?
Yikes, I don't have the sponsors in my head.
Okay, that's
I
okay.
think, I think
we
one
can
of them
look.
was from Heinsberg, so that one did
That's why
stand
it
out to
popped
me.
out at you.
Yeah. But I'm not sure that the sponsors matter as much as whether leadership feels like that bill has any reason to come up. If it does, then maybe one of the committees will do something with it. And if it doesn't, then it'll just sit on the wall.
Kirsten.
So hopefully I haven't sort of missed anything here, but I myself am not familiar with sort of what specific quote unquote technical corrections content we might be talking about. It's, you know, Pete Gill had just suggested that maybe he could queue that up for the board, but just to make everyone aware, like I haven't seen, I'm not understanding what those specific technical corrections, you know, are or might be.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing and would be certainly something we can put together, just, you know, kind of the list of those technical corrections and having the sense of the board in terms of support on those types of things would be helpful for sure. And we can then kind of put on, you know, maybe another column, the more policy related ones.
Catherine is here now. So, does anyone have any more comment on this agenda item at this time? So let's move on to the Wood Products Manufacturers Report update. Kirsten.
So I actually put together a sort of some slides just to help guide maybe our conversation around this. So if it's okay, I'd like to share those, and Catherine and I will go through it. And maybe, so Catherine, do you want to introduce yourself and we can all do the same? We could start there.
Sure, happy to. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Catherine Servideo. I'm a forester with the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation, and I am the Forest Economy Program Manager.
Thank you for coming, Catherine. I'm Janet Hurley. I'm the board chair. Sarah, you want to go next?
Sure. Sarah Had, LURB member.
Brooke
Dingledine, LURB member.
and Alex.
Hi, Catherine. I'm Alex Weinhagen.
So those are the 5 board members, Catherine. And I take it you probably know most of the staff. Okay. So let's let Kirsten share screen.
So this is the legislative charge, which I know you've all seen, but I thought might be helpful to have in front of us. So this is the Land Use Review Board study in consultation with Department of Forest Parks and Recreation. And the work on this report was initiated before the Land Use Review Board was seated. You know, the initial deadline for the report, I think, was January 1. So there was a little bit of a disconnect between having a report that this body was responsible to file before the body was seated. So the Natural Resources Board asked Forest and Parks to lead the work on this report. And at some point, I became involved in working alongside Catherine on it as well as a staff person. So the work on this has been underway for some time. And but it is, it is the Land Use Review Board's report. So it's great that we can provide this update of where things are today. And as the language indicates, it's to address the Act 250 permit process to better support wood products manufacturers and their role in the forest economy. And that we shall examine the Act 250 permit process and identify how the minor permit process has been working and whether there are shortcomings or challenges. So it's focused on the minor process, which is, not administrative, but applications for which there wasn't a hearing. And then this is something that the report, can include looking at permits holistically to understand, A&R permits, municipal permits, where they apply, and including Act 250, obviously, and develop recommendations to find efficiencies or potentially recommend an alternative permit process for this sector. And then this was it was December 15th, not January 1, I misspoke. This deadline has been extended to March 15th. There's been some correspondence with legislators granting authorization for that extension. Catherine, do you want to jump in here a little bit?
Sure. So I think we just wanted to kind of clarify or explain to the board exactly what is meant in some of that charge that the legislature gave. So wood product is a defined term in statute, and it's used in many places in Vermont law. And then wood products manufacturer is another defined term. So that is specifically refers to facilities that get wood products in from forestry operations and then add value either through processing like at sawmills or through marketing like what facilities that we call concentration yards. So this is a limited subset of the Vermont's forest economy. These are only operations that are getting raw materials directly from in-woods forestry operations. And then Kirsten, I think, has added a couple of slides here just to kind of give a background of the current or previous legislation that touched on wood products manufacturers. So this is some of the permit conditions. These changes were made several years back. This is what is often referred to as the hours of operation changes. And so this provision is, in my understanding of the intent is that it was to kind of incorporate or consider the seasonal and the land use dependent and weather dependent nature of forestry operations when district commissions are imposing or considering permit conditions that would limit hours of operation for wood products manufacturers. And included in that is recognizing that wood heat fuels are also seasonal and can be delivered in emergency situations, and so the hours of operation allowances were incorporated as well for deliveries of wood heat fuels from those manufacturers.
Catherine, can I ask a question?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
On the previous slide, I noticed under wood product that maple sap was included, and then under manufacturers, I didn't see maple sugaring facilities. Is there, are they included or not?
That is actually probably a better question for Allison. I am not an attorney,
Okay,
but I can say that the maple sap is considered a wood product. It's only once you start to process it, that it becomes a value-added food product. So there's a little bit of a overlap that is always a source of confusion.
So
Yeah, I
maple
don't-
sugaring is part of the definition of farming.
okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, we don't have to belabor that. I
Okay,
just
okay.
wanted to
Yeah.
raise that.
Yeah. And are we done with talking about hours?
Yeah.
Oh, here.
And please feel free to interrupt with any other questions anytime I'm talking. Always happy to answer to the best of my ability. So this change, this was part of Act 181, that also asked for this wood products manufacturing study. So this change allows the prime ag soil mitigation fees to be calculated at a 1-to-1 ratio, as opposed to the variable ratios that are in place for other developers. So this 1-to-1, that's the same ratio that's used for industrial parks. And the intent here is my understanding is to recognize the effects or the benefits that wood products manufacturers provide to Vermont's working lands and to the overall intent of Act 250. And then the minor permit process that Kirsten mentioned. So currently, wood products manufacturers that operate at or below these thresholds qualify for consideration as a minor application, and they would become a major application only if a hearing is requested. But they're given a presumption based on their volume of production that they're at a minor application.
So back to the study. So what's been underway is sort of a phased work initiative. The first part being a survey that has been developed to gauge and receive feedback from people who've obtained Act 250 permits already by sending an electronic survey to primary contacts as identified on our database. And we can get into more detail about the specifics of the survey if there's interest. Also, a file review of Act 250 permits corresponding to wood product manufacturing sector. And lastly, interviews with people who've received wood products manufacturing permits. And this stage of the study work is underway. It's been, I guess, Catherine, feel free to characterize it how you like, but it's been a sort of a collaboration between Land Use Review Board staff and Catherine has been doing quite a bit of work, and we appreciate all of her assistance with it. So there's quite a bit of looking at, data and information. And the next part of the work will involve identifying and meeting with a stakeholder group. And that's been initiated, but a meeting hasn't yet been scheduled or held. And then, lastly, obviously a report that's specifically responsive to the legislative mandate needs to be written and filed with the legislature. And I guess, Catherine, do you want to add anything, or I'm guessing the board may have questions about all of this?
Yeah, this was a very, very high level kind of overview of what we're doing for this report. So definitely happy to answer any questions.
I have one right off the bat, and that is, how long has the minor permitting provision been in place for wood product manufacturers?
Yeah, that process was, that legislation was from 2018.
Got it.
So it was
we
always
have-
available, but it was created as that presumption for wood product manufacturers in 2018.
So we have 6 years of track record to talk to people about and ask them how it's working.
Yes, there's a little bit of a caveat to that I would add, which is that due to kind of economic factors, both in the state, regionally, and globally, there have not been as many permit applications for wood products manufacturers in those years, than what we probably would have seen had 2008 not happened. So although it's a number of years that provision has been in the law, there have not been that many permits that have actually gone through it.
Well, this slide says that there's a file review includes 76 files. Does that mean
That goes
76 permits?
before, yeah, so it's before and after, that
Okay.
way. Yeah, because if we only look after, then we have no basis for comparison. It's hard to say how well it's going if we only look at people who've gone through the process after it happened. So we're looking at both ends so that we have a baseline and can really answer that question of how's it going.
So just to clarify on a larger policy front, because in Vermont, agriculture and forestry are sort of the twin pillars of the working landscape, right?
Yes.
And wood products manufacturers are in one of those pillars. But when it comes to agriculture, 750 head dairy farm is exempt from Act 250, correct?
It depends, I think, on a lot of different factors. And I think there are certainly cases where they may be, but Allison can probably speak to this better than me.
I mean, I'm
Yeah, it
comfortable
was-
speaking to it. The short answer is, Alex, that, yeah, I mean, farming, unless it's above 2,500 feet, is exempt.
It was a little bit of a rhetorical question, but
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure everyone was clear about the somewhat strange
Well,
difference between the two.
well, yeah, I mean, there's farming and there's logging, and then there's activities that people undertake with agricultural products, and there's things that people undertake with the products of logging. And
Understood.
yeah,
And then, sorry to be talking, but I just figured I'd get it all out at once. Stakeholder group, it sounds like that's still to come. Do you have a sense of who those people will be, which stakeholders we're talking about?
Yeah, we'll be starting with our Forest Future Strategic Roadmap Implementation Steering Committee. So that's a broad-based set of stakeholders. It includes both wood products manufacturers, but also representatives from our land use recreation community and from conservation organizations. So it's a broad-based group of stakeholders, and that's where we'll be starting this conversation. And those individuals may recommend additional stakeholders for us to bring in.
Catherine, can you repeat the name of that group?
Absolutely. It's the Forest Future Strategic Roadmap Implementation Steering Committee. I apologize, it is a long one. If you go to FBR's website, you can also find additional information about that.
Thank you. It sounds like this is something that we will need another extension on. Since that's only 5 weeks away, basically 5 to 6 weeks away. And have the surveys already happened, or are they still in process?
the surveys have not gone out. But I think that we anticipate that it's likely they'll go out this week. Catherine, would you agree with that? We're
Yes.
almost at the last, yeah. And yeah, it's been a bit of a project getting that queued up and ready to hit the send button on. We've verified functionality of emails and a bunch of other stuff. And ANR is sort of hosting how that will be delivered to the state directly into a spreadsheet. And we've agreed on exactly how we're going to transmit it, the time frame, et cetera. But no, we haven't hit the send button. And I think we landed on a 10-day
Oops.
turnaround.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so
Brooke?
it's being sent out with a deadline, and then we're sending out a reminder a couple days before the deadline, and then on the day of the deadline. And we've come up with the transmittal language, instructing the recipient that if they're not the person who's best able to respond to the survey, to forward it to, the person representing that project who is. But I
Brooke,
would tend to
sorry.
agree with you, Janet, that I think it's somewhat likely that we may need an extension.
Yeah.
And I anticipate that this would be brought back to the board. This is sort of coming up with how the board will be engaging on not just this study, but perhaps the other studies that will follow on other topics. So I know we have that as another agenda item today for discussion.
Yes, thank you. Brooke?
Ought we have Allison or Pete consider communicating an extension on this now while there are these technical changes that are being proposed? I mean, in reality, it's a fait accompli. There simply is not enough time to do an appropriate qualitative stakeholder engagement here and then proper reporting on it. So why don't we just try to estimate what was the original time frame and where are we? And maybe it's September that we need to ask for to be written into the amended, whatever ends up changing the statute.
Thoughts from other board members on Brooke's suggestion?
Yes, please.
Mhm.
Maybe Pete can illuminate us as to how we got the first extension in the first place, because I don't think legislation made that happen.
Right.
Yeah, happy to. That's a request of the chairs of jurisdiction that this would be going to. And based on what we had sent, I think, to the chairs at that time, I can draft something up and have Janet submit that. I'll also note that we have, I think it's for this week, but we've got time in front of the House Agriculture Committee, and we can also give them we're giving them just a quick hello from Janet, a meet and greet, so to speak, introduction. But we could also mention it at that time too, because I know that the chair in that committee is certainly anticipating and looking forward to seeing this study when it's ready.
And
So we can give
Pete,
them a heads up on that.
the extension that we got, did that go through that committee?
Let me see here. I can pull it up. It may have just been with Environment Committee. Let me look it up. I'll get back to
Okay.
you. Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions for Catherine or comments on wood products study?
Only to say
Kirsten?
thank you for helping us do it, and hopefully Kirsten can provide guidance. You and Kirsten can provide guidance to Janet and Pete as to what an extension should go through, whether that's June or September or what have you. I would defer to you who are actually working on it to know how much more time you need.
That was going to be my suggestion that Catherine and I connect and report back a suggested timeframe.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we can definitely do that. Yeah, always happy to be of assistance.
Okay, thank you very much, Catherine. Oh, you're waving. I'm sorry. Michaela was waving and I didn't know whether she was wanting to talk. Brooke,
Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you, Catherine. Allison, I'm just wondering, do we need like a motion to maybe authorize Janet to give Pete the okay to do something here?
Sounded like they were gonna, on Pete's request for the extension. It sounds like we were just gonna, we're maybe not ready for the specific motion because we're gonna hear back from Kirsten and Catherine on what timing. So maybe we can table that till we have the specific proposal.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
And just in response to your question, Janet, it was the House Committee on Agriculture, Food Resilience, and Forestry. So that was one. And then it was the two environmental committees, the Senate and the House.
okay, all three of them. Okay,
But I would
Great.
agree, yeah, we should have a request date that we're looking for, and we can kind of give them a quick outline on the reasons.
Kirsten and Catherine, do you think if we had this on our agenda next Monday or actually, is it next Monday next Monday that there would be any news in terms of a time frame, or should we put it out a little further?
I would think that in the next week we could map out a schedule. Do you agree, Catherine?
Yes, I do. I agree.
Okay, great.
Okay, so we'll try to have you back on Monday, Catherine.
One other question or thing to be thinking about from the board's perspective that might help Kirsten and Catherine on this is we've discussed, how you want to look at public engagement. Looking at the March 15th deadline, I think they were trying to shorten that up a little bit and see if we couldn't squeeze it in some way, either through the process with the board. The alternative would be, and what we've done in some other previous studies, is to have, a week to 2 week period where there's public comment open on a draft that has gone through the more specific stakeholder process. If the board is opting to go in that direction, I just want to make sure that Catherine and Kirsten kind of have that information as they're trying to build out a timeline.
We can discuss that in the next agenda item a little bit. Are we ready to move on to studies and reports? Go ahead, Catherine.
Yeah, apologies. I'm happy to come back next week. I just have a little bit of a logistics request for your consideration, which is if it's at all possible to set a time in the agenda for me to join you. It just makes it a lot easier for my scheduling. So that would be lovely.
I'm not sure, Catherine, that we actually need to have you back. Not that I don't want you to come back.
That's fine
but
too. Yeah.
I think Kirsten could report on behalf of the joint efforts that you two are working on, and then you can go about your day.
That works too.
Yeah, that's fine with me too. Okay, we'll move on to studies and reports. So we wanted to discuss how, as a board, to go about completing these studies and reports in a general fashion. We delegated at our meeting last week. Do you all have ideas about how you would like to see us do this in a consistent manner between the different studies and rulemaking processes. I mean, rulemaking is sort of set for us to some degree. And we will be learning more about that, those of us who haven't been involved in the state rulemaking process before. But how about let's just see what board members have to say, or what ideas board members have about this process. Go ahead, Brooke.
I'll jump in. First of all, seeing the elements that for the wood products, I think that's very good. Those different, surveys takes a lot of thought to get the right questions into the survey, but I think that's really important for consistency, no matter who you're engaging in terms of a stakeholder. In terms of the appeal silo, I have been setting about to obtain sort of like a records review of what were all of the prior attempts at, determining whether or not it was, court versus e-board versus going back to a hybrid model, whatever. And I'm really looking forward to, so that is something I'm trying to amass. I mean, I had certainly knowledge of various throughout the years efforts, but really trying to bring all that information together for a couple of reasons. One is we don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. We know that there's a lot of great information about how those systems were working, and what people's opinions of them are and why we morphed from one to the other. The other thing that I think is important is the interview piece that I saw with individuals that are permittees. But in my silo, I am really interested in, we mentioned, okay, sure, I'll go talk with some environmental lawyers or go through the VBA for some of the practitioners, but I don't want that to be the focus or for people to think that I have a bias just because I'm a lawyer. I have had experience before the environmental board for years, the environmental court, and then the environmental division. And sure, I'm a lawyer, but I have experienced firsthand through my clients' representation the great parts about each system and the frustrations and obstacles. So in terms of my reach out, I am hoping desperately to tap into the retired folks who were coordinators for decades. We have a couple that are still very involved in public life and I hope still care about the Act 250 process. We have some lawyers, we have some scientists, we have certainly Mr. Weiss, and I see Renee Carpenter is on the call now. So we have such a diverse and rich, deep bench here in Vermont. That is my goal in terms of what I think it's been a controversial issue over the years. And I want to make sure that people don't think that I or this board have any built-in agenda or bias about trying to, preserve the environmental division. This is my goal here is to look at all of the information, report on it, and do those kinds of analyses, cost benefit. How can we construct the things that are the best parts of all of it? And what does that mean in terms of what ends up at the other end? So public engagement, I think, is really important. But having that one-on-one or small groups of these folks so that we can really drill down and understand where they're coming from and why, because setting up a meeting with people showing up and having 2 minutes to talk is not sufficient. We need to really embrace all of the expertise that we have available to us. The other thing that I'll say quickly is I think having draft reports and then public comment for 2 weeks is an awesome idea because we don't always get it right. We may not be interpreting the message, and having that last opportunity to correct things or to at least have a voice on them, I think is essential. So I'll shut up now.
Muted, Janet.
Sorry. Brooke, that sounds great. And I do like that idea of public comment on a draft. Do others have
Yeah, I was
thoughts?
going to make the same comment that what Pete described, I think, is best practice. So I'm happy to hear Brooke endorse it as well. And I think it might be helpful for me anyways to work backwards. So to know that here's your deadline. Here's how long it's going to take to finalize the report after you've received your last round of public comment. Here's how long we want to have public comment for. Here's how long you need to advertise the fact that we are going to solicit public comment, which means you have to have something ready, prior to that. And then how long is it going to take to get the actual draft report ready? And then backwards from that, into stakeholder group, outreach. I think working backwards might help us get a better sense of our time horizons, and might be a reality check on just how much public engagement we can do at the front end of the process. If we're going to run out of time, we may need to sort of load up that public comment at the back end of the process and focus more on the stakeholders at the front end, or not. Depends on just the time horizons once we work the backward analysis. But I do think that it's important that we pay attention to the statutory construction of which stakeholders we are obligated to include. And each of these studies, for the most part, lays that out. The appeal one certainly does, as does the tier 3 process, which the list of stakeholders is a little overwhelming, to be perfectly honest. Just contemplating how I'm going to make that list and reach out to them is daunting. But anyways, we need to do it. Yeah, that's all I had to say about the process.
Anyone else? I just like to say thank you so much, both Alex and Brooke and Kirsten, for thinking about this so deeply and offering your ideas. So, process, I don't know that we have much in terms of updates, given that last week was sort of, as everyone says, like drinking from a fire hose for us. Do people have more discussion on studies and reports, either the process or any updates? Kirsten.
I was just going to say that I was thinking exactly as Alex has laid out of, you what's the deadline, and you sort of work backwards. And, and leave a little buffer here and there. Life can happen. But I'm trying to also kind of conceptualize, that we've got these different study tasks and we've assigned leads, and similar to what occurred today, but with the wood products manufacturing, which was frankly pretty high level, kind of cursory overview. Yeah, I think we're going to have to figure out how we're going to be like that lead person brings back the content as it's being developed to the board. So it's gonna might be just something to think about what that's going to look like. How to, I don't have any perfect kind of like idea of exactly what I think how that should be done, but it's just sort of something I'm thinking about.
I think you're the case study. We had this overview today, and next week we're going to have a little bit more detail. And for you, I guess, instead of working backward, you're going to be working forward to come up with that date that we want to ask for. So, yeah. Brooke.
And I also contemplate hoping to have a wingman in terms of another one of the board members to be with me during those interviews or those small stakeholder meetings, who has, the expertise in that area. I mean, Kirsten, I can see with, folks who have been through the process would be most useful because she and I have both sides of that issue covered. But then in terms of municipalities or regional planning commissions, obviously our other board members might be most helpful. And also having those personal connections to folks, I think is really important because, I'm a known quantity to some folks. You folks all have that same experience with different populations. That we really need to tap into to get their opinions and their positions about things. That's sort of how I'm envisioning it. It's not like I'm just going to go do this on my own. I think having that second person in each of those settings would be really useful.
Right, and then we need to make sure we understand open meeting law triggers if that's going to be the case. So, Sarah?
Happy to be the goose to her maverick, just to help out as needed. And I think to sort of look at where we had been this is all discussion at this point, recognizing that if we were to form a subcommittee that we would need to look at a little bit more. But I think at this point where we're just trying to stand things up, there's a lot of uncertainties and unknowns, but I'm more than willing to help out because I think there's also a component to the appeals process about, I think this was mentioned perhaps sometime the last week, was about on the record reviews. And just familiarity with some of the discussions that have been had in the state over the years about the appeals process. Also the other intricacies of it in terms of party status, and the determinations for that too. So, and have some of that municipal connections. Obviously Kirsten has a lot of great experience too. Has a lot on her plate, particularly with wood products right now, but I think that's something that maybe a few of us could offer to help cycle through as necessary because it's a very important part of what we have on our upcoming time horizon.
Okay, any more thoughts on this topic? It looks like Alex.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not using the hand function very much. I'm just trying to
It's
jump
okay.
in to save time. So yeah, I don't have any update on the tier 3 work or the criterion 8C forest block work yet. Like you said, Janet, I feel like I haven't done anything in the first
Right.
week, so I'm looking forward to doing more this week. But with that said, I like I mentioned before, I'm a little daunted by the stakeholder list, and so I will likely want to circulate some of that to all of you for feedback. And yeah, maybe that has to be at an open meeting. I don't know. Maybe we can work through staff and staff can promulgate some questions that I might have, but I don't know everyone who I need to know. And I bet some of you do. So that I'll be looking for some help on that.
Okay, thanks. Kirsten? You're muted.
Sorry about that. I was just going to quickly respond to something that Brooke mentioned about having a couple people on things like interviews, which I agree, very important. And with the wood products manufacturing study, the plan is that Catherine and I are conducting the interviews together. So just mentioning that detail.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Pete?
Yeah, just to respond to your question, Alex, I do have a list that we had put together on the, at least the statutorily identified folks, for tier 3. So that should be a little bit of a help to you. Just trying to slowly, get that information to you guys without overwhelming everything. But I can certainly do that this week and get you that starting point, at least for folks that of those statutorily identified individuals who in that organization was interested in helping serve out in that role.
I think one more thing to keep in mind is the that we're not over taxing any particular stakeholder individual by getting them on every single one of our of our stakeholder groups. And so not just overwhelming an individual, but also getting more than just one singular perspective from each of the identified stakeholder group. So it might make sense for us to keep apprised of everybody's different stakeholder group makeup, and make sure that we don't have either too much overlap or too little, for that matter. So maybe we're ready to move on to operations.
Great. I can start off with a few updates if you'd like. Let's see, our annual report is in full progress. We've got a great team working on that, set for the February 15th deadline. Aaron Brondike and Rachel Lamonaco are putting together, and Alex Pastor is putting together a lot of the data and verifying the data as it comes through, and then we're working on some of the narrative pieces that will build that out. We should have that ready by the 15th for submission to the committees of jurisdiction, and there I think it's Senate and House environment committees to send that to. And that gives our kind of overall numbers of, how many permits, how many JOs, how many enforcement actions, how many appeals, etc. All identified items in the statute for that required report. So that's in progress and anticipated to have that ready by the deadline. We did post for the D7 district coordinator position. That is up now, and that closes on the 18th of February. So we're hoping to get some good applicants in for that position. Other kind of operational news, we have had discussions with the board, with not this board, but the previous board on 1 acre and 10 acre towns and how to make that process for municipalities as smooth as possible, and also understanding and noting that 1 acre and 10 acre town status is significant in many different ways and sort of amplified under Act 181. So we have dedicated a landing page for that process on our website, including a specific process on how municipalities can review a checklist that prior council had put together, so that they understand the different areas of the statute that they need to meet in order to become a quote unquote 10 acre town. And then they supply that to us and we can make those changes as needed to our list. This does not obviate the jurisdictional opinion route. So in any particular project or related, someone could request a jurisdictional opinion and have, and the result of that could change the status of any particular town based on that. But again, this is just a process to kind of enhance how we're dealing with 1 acre and 10 acre towns for our mapping purposes, for the exemption purposes. It's all going to be important. So we've got a platform for that for municipalities to make their requests known. Yeah, Kirsten.
Just quickly, Pete, is the checklist that's up still the same content of the version that Evan Meenan had developed?
Yeah, it's still
Okay.
essentially the same content, and just, yeah, makes it more of a checklist for them to go through and a resource for towns to utilize in making those certifications. And we're anticipating, depending on the municipality, some municipalities may be very well equipped within their own house and be able to review that and make that certification from a duly authorized individual. But others may, lean on the RPCs, for example, for assistance in that review process. One other thing I wanted to mention, I was just about ready to send out the successor of operations document that you all looked at on your first or second meeting. And you had decided the order of successorship, so to speak. So if there was, again, this is based on emergency operations. If there was an emergency in the state and somebody needed to take on the duties of chair and board to keep things moving in that instance, that someone else would be designated. We can kind of go down that list. In looking at both Jen and I were looking at it and saying, maybe it makes sense now, given that you've elected a vice chair, that Sarah would be the second named individual on that list. But yeah, wanted to note that and then let you all kind of discuss where you want to go with that. I'm happy to file it as is or make any change based on your suggestions.
How dare you even suggest that we alter from the alphabetical list that we came up with? That was so well crafted. Come on.
I'm interested to hear from Sarah, if you would, and I guess it would be Brooke whose spots would be swapped. Any thoughts or?
Works for me.
I'm fine with it.
We've had multiple floods and have not had to utilize this successorship document, but it's always good to be prepared and just to have somebody who can step in on the operations and make sure things keep moving is all really that's essential there.
So I would entertain a motion to name Sarah as the second.
Or first.
First, yes. The first alternate, switching places with Brooke from our alphabetical list.
I'll second that so we can discuss it.
Well, I can't really make the motion. I can entertain one.
Okay, then I'll discuss it before the motion. Do we have to do anything, Pete? Like, do we have to re-sign forms? Because if we do, I don't think we should change it. I think we should just go with what we did. But if we don't have to do anything, then sure, we can swap the two. What do we have to do?
Need to, the only thing we need to do is Janet will have to I'll fill it out with that change in order, and then Janet will sign that document. But all the other documents in terms of oath of service, etc., that you all filled out, those are regardless of the order.
Okay. So it sounds relatively painless for all of us except Janet. And she's the chair, so that's her job to endure pain. Okay, well then I'll make the motion Janet suggested to swap the succession order such that Sarah is number 1 and Brooke is number 2.
I'll second.
Okay, any more discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It was a unanimous decision. So Pete will just type it up and get it back to me for my electronic signature. Any
The
more on
other-
operations?
The only other things I was going to mention, and you guys have touched on a little bit of both of these, but so the February 10th meeting, there's been discussions about having that one set in Essex, and I think the wheels are in motion on that. And the February 18th meeting, wheels are in motion to have that one in Montpelier as an opportunity for the board to meet and greet and hear from their agency partners, AFM, ACCD, others, about how their programs operate and interact with Act 250. And Janet has been helping out with those discussions as well.
I thought Essex was the 14th. Am I confusing them?
You are. It's the 10th, a
10th.
week from today.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Maddie, you had your hand up.
Well, actually, I'll identify Rachel LaMonaco, Business Director for the Natural Resources Board. I have a couple of their operations updates, but they can wait until after the scheduling information.
Any other discussions or thoughts on those meetings? And reminder, we will have an agenda setting meeting later this week as well for the board to discuss these. But I do want to make sure on the 18th, I'll continue to set that in motion. And then on the 10th, just want to make sure that we can get outreach to staff and commission members so that they're aware of the time and day to attend if they're interested and willing.
Kirsten.
So I'm just kind of wondering, we had set 1 p.m. as the meeting times for the Monday meetings. And I'm not sure how the other known participants who we would be inviting, even beyond like regional commissioners and regional staff, like how that will fit into the open meeting, warned meeting structure, or if there would be separate kind of meet and greet as well that would qualify as not needing to be part of the open formal meeting.
So Kirsten, I can address that for the February 10th meeting, which Sarah and I have been collaborating to try to organize. And we had thoughts of meet and greets and non-open meeting sorts of training-y discussions. And I think after talking with Pete, it felt safer to wrap everything into the open meeting, with the exception of lunch, and that sort of breaking of bread prior to the meeting, which we will do. So at least for the 10th, we've talked about a format that we can talk more at our agenda setting meeting on Wednesday, but essentially, have a time at the beginning of the open meeting to hear from staff and commissioners, and then make sure that we schedule whoever else wants to attend, like the meeting on the 18th, as Pete indicated, some agency staff, making sure that they're available in that afternoon slot, post 1:30, and slot them in that way.
Okay, thanks. That all sounds good to me. Essex on the 10th and Montpelier on the 18th. Or is it the 17th? Oh, I guess it's the 18th. We had already agreed to bump it to the
Yeah.
Tuesday.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rachel, I think we're good to go to you.
Okay. For the record, Rachel Monaco, Business Director for the Land Use Review Board. One operational update. in that we have a vacant position in our Montpelier office for a technician position. Lori Grenier retired at the end of the year, and that position has been vacant for, well, since the beginning of January. Happy to announce that we have a accepted candidate for that position. Her name is Catherine Gott. She comes to us from the DEC stormwater program where she's currently a technician. She uses a lot of the same databases and infrastructure that we use on a day-to-day basis. So I really think this is a good, a candidate that could really have the potential for hitting the ground running. So she has a background. She worked in she did administrative work for Stowe Mountain Resort in the past, and she's also worked for the U.S. Navy, but has most recently worked for the DEC stormwater program for, I believe, about 6 years. So her first day is going to be February 24th, so a couple weeks from now. So we'll be working to onboard her over the next couple weeks. That's it for me for operational updates.
Thank you, Rachel. So can we move on to you under budget?
We can. I believe you all saw there were 3 different documents posted on our website along with our agenda. Those documents are a narrative for our FY25 budget adjustment, a narrative for our FY26 budget, and then line items for our FY26 budget, which also include our approved budget for FY25 and our actual budget receipts for FY24. So I'm gonna move through these sort of one by one and then do a small overview and then pause for questions if that's how everybody would like to proceed. Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. So for the FY25 budget adjustment, really we're doing what we've proposed is a technical correction. In Act 181 of 2024, Section 113B included an appropriation for the board in a sum of $1.3 million. That part of that should have been a transfer and part of that should have been an appropriation. An appropriation gives you spending authority, but in a fiscal note that was generated from the Joint Fiscal Office dated May 9th, 2024, the $1.3 million was summed up as $400,000 to compensate for salaries and benefits for new employees for the new Land Use Review Board members, and $900,000 in loss and fee revenue in fiscal year 2025, largely derived from the interim housing exemptions that came through in Act 181 of 2024. So really what we're hoping to do here is leave $400,000 of that 1.3 million appropriation as an appropriation to compensate for salaries and benefits for the 4 new board members for the second half of FY 2025. And then modify $900,000 as a transfer to the Act 250 permit fund. Any questions on that?
I hate to be dumb, but it's the same number. It's 1.3 million. So what's the significance of the splitting and shuffling?
Yeah, So an appropriation means that we could spend all of that 1.3 million, but they only actually intended us to spend 400,000. So we're doing this correction to not give us more than what we should in spending authority, if that makes sense.
But don't we, sorry, don't we spend the money we take in revenue? But you're saying that the revenue projection hadn't changed, so we need to add the 900,000 to it?
So the 900,000 in FY25, we submitted a budget in about over a year and a half ago. And that budget included about $2.9 million in fee revenue. As a result of the interim exemptions in Act 181 of 2024 and Act 47, the Home Act of 2023, our analysis is that we would see about $900,000 less in fee revenue than what we originally anticipated without those exemptions being present. So to remedy that, the correct mechanism in finance and management is a transfer. It's not an appropriation. Gives you different, there's different checks and balances on those two ways of accepting money, from a state to state agency, if that makes sense.
So this is sort of word and fiscal semantics in the sense that the legislature said, we know you're going to need $1.3 million more, but we need it for different reasons. We're only spending $400,000 more, but we're taking in $900,000 less. So it's just sort of, yeah. Got it. Thank you
It's a
for
technical
explaining.
correction. I would agree with that. Yeah. Any other questions from other? Okay. Next I'll go to the FY26. So this is the upcoming fiscal year budget. I'll say that this is, there's two components to this. One is a base budget appropriation, which is basically our operational expenditures throughout the course of the fiscal year, whether that's personnel and benefits or operational costs. In addition to that, you can present a decision item, which we did in this session. So first I'll go through the base budget and then we'll talk about the decision item that we submitted. So
Rachel?
Yep.
Can you share your screen and show, or sort of go through it can we see it as you go through?
Let me get that.
Yeah, 1 second. I just got to pull it up. This is what you're talking about?
Yep.
Can you all see
Sorry.
this?
I thought you were talking about the actual budget file, but this is good. Yes, go ahead.
Sure. This is just going to be a helpful overview and then we can go through questions on the more detailed line items.
Yes, thank you.
So in FY26, I'll back up and say that traditionally over the last several years, the Natural Resources Board has been funded 80% from special fund revenues, which are derived from our primarily Act 250 permit application fees, with 20% of our revenue generated from a general fund appropriation. That breakdown, when you're looking at expenditures, is about 90% personnel costs and 10% operating costs. So moving into what that traditional posture was, and accounting for Act 181, which had significant upward and downward pressures. First, the upward pressures are 5 new positions that came through in Act 181. 4 new board member positions, as well as a new attorney position, and converting the executive director position from a limited service, one-time funded position, bringing that position into our base budget. So apologies, 6 additional positions. That is a considerable upward pressure on salaries and benefits. And again, there's significant downward pressure on our fee revenue that we could potentially forecast given interim exemptions from Act 181 of 2024 and Act 47 of 2023. So the result is a pretty significant change to how we are proposing to structure our budget. So again, in 2025, our budget was structured as 80% special fund revenue fee revenue, 20% general fund revenue. In the latest in our proposal for FY26, we're basically reversing those percentages. About 75% of our revenue derived from general fund funding and 25% derived from fee revenue. So if you want to scroll to the last page here, Maddie.
Yeah.
You can see that the columns here are FY24 actuals, which is what we actually expended in fiscal year 2024. The FY25 original as passed budget, the FY25 budget after the budget adjustment, and then the FY26 proposed budget. So you can see that there's then a column for a difference between FY25 and FY26. You can see that we're significantly reducing our funding here that we're anticipating in fee revenue in the Act 250 permit fund. And we're significantly increasing our general fund support, given those upward and downward pressures. So I'll stop there for questions.
I'll keep sharing this until I hear otherwise.
Thank you. That's a good idea, Maddie. Any questions? Comments?
My only question has to do with the limited term positions. How many are they? Are there still in as reflected in the FY26 budget, and when do they end?
Sure. So that brings me to the decision item, which is the second part of our budget submission. I should say that before I get there, the governor presented his recommended budget to the General Assembly last week. Both our budget adjustment for FY25, our proposal was accepted in the governor's recommend, and our base appropriation, which we just went through about that reversion of special fund and general fund kind of percentages funding our organization, that was also accepted in the governor's recommended budget, which is great news, honestly. For the decision item that we submitted, we proposed this year 2 additional positions. If you want to go back to the narrative and then scroll down to staffing and decision item.
Okay.
So currently there are 3 limited service positions. There are 2 district coordinator positions and the executive director position is a limited service position. Those are funded by a separate one-time state fiscal recovery fund appropriation. Really, that money is derived from American Rescue Plan Act money. So that was a one-time appropriation to fund those positions for 3 years on a limited service basis. That appropriation is set to run out at the end of 2025. There, except for the executive director position, which was made permanent in Act 181 of 2024. So that position at the end of the fiscal year, or at the turnover of the fiscal year, is going to be moved from a limited service position to a permanent position. Does that make sense? That leaves 2 district coordinator positions that are currently limited service funded. So in our budget request this year, we asked for 2 additional positions to be made permanent. Well, not made permanent, but an appropriation to be given to us to have limited service positions for an additional 2.5-year term. They're sort of reformatted, one of them being a district coordinator position and one of them being a board coordinator position. And you can kind of read more in our narrative that we posted online about what we thought the duties for those positions might cover. And Pete, I don't know if you have anything to add with that. I will just say that our decision item for the funding for these 2 additional limited service positions was not accepted by the governor's office, and it's not in his recommended budget. Pete, do you want to add anything here?
Sorry, Rachel, can you repeat what you just said?
Sure. We made a proposal in our FY26 budget for 2 additional limited service positions to be created with one-time funding for a 2.5-year duration for those positions.
Right.
That proposal was not accepted in the governor's recommended budget.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so as you can see from that last statement, the one door was closed on those 2 positions, extending those 2 positions, which was unfortunate, but there are other potential doors that are there, and we, I think, would intend on pursuing those options, but it's a legislative decision to further fund those. I'll just say from my perspective as supervisor of those positions and just seeing kind of the operations of our organization over the past couple of years, it has been quite tremendous to have those positions available. I have heard anecdotal evidence in terms of just the efficiency of process, in having those abilities. And I see it from my perspective as well, just having these 2 individuals, and we are very fortunate to have 2 very capable individuals in those positions right now, that are just allowing for flexibility of operations, allowing folks to have vacation time, but continuity of services to the public on applications and such. Another, very recent example is we have a board member that was a district coordinator that left a void in our organization, and we're able to keep going, I think, in part certainly by having Kevin Anderson, who's our Northern District Coordinator, roving, be able to slot in there and take a majority of those matters and keep again that moving. Not to say there's not others, there are others that are helping out with that particular void, but it's been very helpful to have that flexibility of this person is out, or we need a little help in District 4 with, an overwhelming load of matters that have come in, we can slot somebody in to help out with that and have a little escape valve that way. So at any rate, the bottom line is from my perspective, those have been very worthwhile positions. We tried to craft some, positions here as Rachel has outlined that would hopefully be attractive to folks in the legislature to continue the support for the board and the program overall.
Thanks, Pete. Before I get to Kirsten, I just want to agree that those two positions have made a huge difference in terms of the district level permitting process, and have led to, at least in District 8, enormous relief from people on the permitting side who are, they're able to hear from the district staff much sooner than they had been, and there were a lot of complaints about it. And I would hope that we can look at other doors, particularly for that district level staffing support, so that we can continue providing that better, more efficient or thorough service on the permit side. Kirsten.
Yeah, I would just echo what Pete and the prior NRB chair had provided in this budget letter, that those positions, from my perspective as a former coordinator, have been incredibly helpful to the organization. I guess the other piece that I would note is there's a state coordinator who has, if you look at the job description, there's a lot in that role, and staff have spent time implementing, developing and implementing guidance related to the interim housing exemptions, and that has sometimes meant that particular resource hasn't been as available to provide extra support in the regional offices of the type that might otherwise be the case. Like all these legislative changes, bring with them on the implementation side, like quite a bit of extra staff time. So yeah, it's been really great having those two roving coordinators in the organization, and I really hope that we can find a way to continue to fund them.
Alex?
So I just want to be clear, the proposal that the governor's office didn't bring forward was for two positions to continue as limited service, one of which is a roving district coordinator, which it sounds like there's some real value and appreciation of, but the other was a board coordinator position. We don't currently have that, right? So if there are two limited service positions today, are they both roving coordinators? And would we have lost one of them anyway under the proposal to have one become a board coordinator?
I think the other job description was flexible, Alex. Wasn't it, Pete? Yeah. To address both the board and district level work.
Okay.
But currently those positions expire at the end of this year. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Correct.
That's what we've got, unless we find another door.
And those two positions are both roving coordinators?
Yeah.
Yeah, so just to clarify there too, the proposal that we came up with was, a creative approach, and kind of identified the needs that we were seeing, not knowing exactly who would be on the board and what you would need and how you would want things structured. So you may look at that and say, oh, we'd like, it might be another way that we could go about some of this. I guess I will say that, you know, there certainly is a real need on the district coordinator and the roving side of things. The other anecdote I'll leave this with too is someone in the Southern District had said, essentially they were offering to pay for an independent private person to be a district coordinator so that they could ensure that things would be going forward. And I'm sure that knowing that their funding is going to end at the end of this year, they would be very keen to be supporting a proposal that would keep the existing structure moving forward.
Sarah, you had your hand up. Have your hand up.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think sort of compounding this too is that we have a new application process to stand up for reviewing tier 1As to review and approve regional plans. So there's going to be more capacity needed within the organization that with what will result in technically fewer people than we have now is sort of concerning in terms of efficiency in considering those processes and getting those stood up and approved on the very tight timelines that we've been given. So I just wanted to throw in my 2 cents on that in terms of this potentially being concerning to hamstring us a bit more so than we would otherwise be.
And not to contradict that, but we do have 4 new full-time board members, and I'm sure that we'll be able to take up some of what might come our way, perhaps without a full-time land use review board coordinator. I think that is yet to be determined how much we will need, but I think it's really important that we know that the district level staffing has this need.
Yeah, so Pete, help educate me about how the state budgeting process works. As Rachel indicated, the prior board, made a recommendation to the governor, and the governor's office said no. So then it goes to the legislature. Are we in front of the legislature making the same request? Is that not? Is that frowned upon? How does that work?
That door number 2?
Yeah, that would be my description of door number 2 is finding another bill or vehicle that would allow, that would have funding attachments to it. That will ultimately have to be approved by the appropriations committee. But this is, it's a little bit of a new territory. You're a full-time board that has identified a funding need. I haven't seen indications from the governor's office, saying that we can't go in this direction and request and make those requests known to the legislature. So I would think that we would want to proceed in that way.
Kirsten?
So, I think that it can be really important with door number 2 to have a board member together with staff, at the State House, answering questions, presenting the information, doing the advocacy, etc., following it along its way. And Janet, I know as chair, you have already a long list of responsibilities, but I was wondering, I was sort of going to maybe nominate Sarah if she's interested to help with that. I think with your town management background, I want, just interested to know how the others are feeling, or maybe what staff thoughts might be about how they see door number 2 working, if there's consensus that should occur.
I'm not, like I just intimated, I don't feel like I know what my workload I don't know that it's any more than any other board members at this point in terms of what we took on for individual studies and rulemaking coordination. So I'm not convinced that I couldn't do that as part of my legislative liaisoning that we already suggested I do. Not to say that I wouldn't certainly appreciate Sarah's input. But yeah,
Yeah. I'm kind of feeling like the budget is kind of this one kind of thing that one of us has to sort of work alongside Rachel on, and
Mhm.
so we should, yeah, if that's you, Janet, that's great.
the budget,
Um,
I would love Sarah to take that on.
Well, yeah, I see that what we're talking about with these two positions kind of hand in hand with the budget.
Yeah, yeah. But in
Great.
terms of being in front of the legislature and making the ask. But Sarah, go ahead.
I would agree. I was just gonna say, I'm happy to help behind the scenes and help coordinate and have you in that legislative role. I think it's important, particularly in the early formations of things, that you be that face, Janet, as long as you can. Happy to work crunching numbers in the background too, but I think that's a perfect plan.
Agreed from my standpoint. I think our chair has to step up and yeah, it's going to be really important that legislators, when they think of the board, they think of you, Janet, first, and don't get confused between, you know, you appearing on some policy question and one of the rest of us appearing on a budgetary question. It's all the same thing to a legislator. I
Yeah.
think it's also would be important for me to just have a better understanding of if there's a third door, Pete. You know, if there's some other organizational strategy that we could implement to address the real issue that we're talking about that doesn't involve more money. Assuming that we may not get more money, right? The governor said no, the legislature may say the same. I think we should have a door 3, or at least be thinking about what that would be. And I know that the organization's gone through a lot of change with you know, the 4 new board members joining, but maybe there's additional efficiencies that could better address the issue. I certainly don't know what they are now, but I'd like to keep that option open. Because I know the fiscal committees are going to look at how much money this organization received in the last year and the change in the revenue sources. And I imagine it's going to be a high bar to say that we need more.
Thank you, Alex. Any more budget questions or comments or discussion? Okay, hearing none, let's move on to discussion of appeals, enforcement, and attorney-client memoranda. Presume somebody might want to suggest that we, go ahead, Brooke.
I noticed earlier that Renee had come into the meeting. Oh, maybe she's left. I just wanted to make sure we gave another opportunity for public comment since Renee signed in after we had that opportunity earlier on, but it looks like she's exited. So unless Mr. Weiss has additional comments, I guess never mind.
Yeah, it seems likely that we're going to go
Okay.
into executive session to discuss some of these enforcement and appeal matters. So it might be an appropriate time, Janet, to ask if Mr. Weiss
Got it.
has any comments.
Got it.
Unmuted, so you can speak now.
Oh,
Sarah, did you have something to say before we do that? Okay. Any public comment?
oh, okay, they just moved, I see. Yes, please.
Go ahead, Tom.
It sounded like at the beginning of the meeting, you were discussing the governor's proposal for his Act 250 and other amendments. And it sounded like you had seen that document. And if what I understood is correct, I'm wondering how the public can get a hold of that document. I heard Peter say that it's not yet a draft, a bill. It might be a draft resolution. I thought I heard him say it had been circulated to various committees. So I'm wondering if I can get a little more information so I can try and track it down before it comes out as a draft resolution or a draft request.
I think it may be available on the legislative committee pages because it was presented on Wednesday to the joint committees.
Correct. If, Tom, if you
Okay,
go
so it
to
would
the
be
House
Last
Committee
week,
on.
Wednesday. Thank you. That date is a big help.
Yes, January 30th.
Thank you.
Alex, your hand is up.
Not anymore.
Okay. Okay, any other comment, public comment? Okay, hearing none, let's move on to our last item on the agenda before adjournment. Discussion of appeals, enforcement, and attorney-client memoranda. Sarah.
I believe we have material that warrants an executive session. I would like to make a motion. The board needs to discuss pending and probable Act 250 appeals and enforcement actions and have confidential attorney-client communications on these matters. I move that we find that premature public knowledge of these matters would place the board at substantial disadvantage and the board enter executive session.
Okay, I have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Kirsten seconded that motion. Any discussion? Hearing or seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
None opposed. I saw 5 hands go up. So we are moving into executive session. Maddie, will you remind us? We leave this and just enter the next one, correct?
Yep, leave this meeting and join the executive session
Okay.
calendar reminder. Yep.
Thank you. See you soon. Okay, the 5 board members have returned to the meeting. And let me just, I think all we have left on the agenda is adjournment. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of adjournment, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
None opposed. That was a unanimous decision. This meeting of the Land Use Review Board is adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.